Welcome to the eCommerce Profitability Show, a podcast by Link My Books. We speak with profitable e-commerce store owners and experts to help your e-commerce business become profitable. Because revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. I'm your host, Dan Little. Joining us today is Evan Padgett, founder of PIQED, the business that helps e-commerce and subscription commerce companies define their investment strategies and growth targets. His 20 years of experience in marketing analytics has seen him go from fashion and health food businesses to helping companies across a whole range of industries grow into their true potential. Evan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So to kick things off, could you share with us your core philosophy or approach towards the nurture and problem solving of e-commerce companies?
Yeah, for me, it's always boiled down to trying to measure as much as possible and an obsession with measurement in anything you can do. So the beauty of digital and the beauty of this industry is largely most things done, including workforce management, team, and of course, marketing and supply chain and logistics, all very measurable and a really kind of fun math problem that when done correctly, when all these pieces work together, it creates an exciting, profitable business. So my approach is largely focused on trying to tell the story and write the narrative with the numbers involved, and then modify those or find ways to attack those as a marketer to change the outcome. Because in the end of the day, I just really geek out and think that running a business, a small business, when you're a person just like myself running a single person business versus a 500 person, 700 person, 1,000 person company, all it is in the end of the day is a really fun, long math equation.
Indeed. Lots of numbers going in and numbers coming out. How has that sort of changed in terms of financial planning for e-commerce over your career? I know you started way back in 2002. How's it evolved since then?
Well, it's interesting. It's come full circle. We had a moment in time until all the bummer stuff from Cambridge Analytica, and then from there, an increased emphasis on privacy and Apple's changes with 14.5 a couple years back. But it started in a world of kind of the Wild West of internet marketing where targeted media wasn't a thing and you were just trying to buy whatever you could at whatever CPM you had. And if you had a product to sell, and this would have been in the early 2000s and in that range, you almost couldn't miss if it was a fun product. And then we got into this world of heavy attribution where pretty much the entire story from their impression all the way to their conversion could be drawn in a straight line by every action they took, by what ad they saw, by what part of the site they clicked on, and et cetera, et cetera. And then now it's obviously kind of walked back a little bit when we don't have direct attribution as tight anymore, last click and other attribution models, which controversial take potentially. I am not a fan of really any attribution model. Feel it's always so loosey-goosey, nebulous, and candidly, as working with big businesses and small businesses, hasn't really changed my opinion on what to run and change marketing tactics when you see attribution like that. I'm not saying it's not useful if you're maybe Pepsi or some brand marketing on 45 channels, but average companies don't really see a lot of benefit from that, in my opinion. So what's changed is there was this golden age of digital advertising, which was kind of, call it 2010 to maybe 2016, to where it was just so rich with data, and then it kind of clamped down after Cambridge Analytica and then clamped down again. So all that's really changed is, and speaking as a marketer and an analyst, what's kind of changed is what you do with that data, what decisions you make with that. And what's uncomfortable for me is you have to work a little bit more in the nebulous, because I liked it when it was nice and clean from beginning to end, and now there's a little bit of just fog in the middle.
Yeah. So how do you recommend e-commerce businesses nowadays to track things? Because I mean, obviously it's all about like working about which of your marketing channels are working. So how do you recommend you do that nowadays when it's a bit harder to track it exactly?
Yeah, so I look at it and I kind of just generally recommend a few different approaches. One, And you'll be surprised, maybe, or maybe not. You'll be surprised on how frequently this is missed. But obviously, your aggregate business performance kind of comes above all. And that's kind of like a dumb thing to say. But a lot of times I find that brands, especially that are, say, they're heavy advertisers on Facebook, or they have everybody kind of has a channel concentration with wherever they're marketing. And you're usually on Meta heavily, or usually on Google heavily, and usually sometimes both. But there's almost always one of those that your brand is built on. So when you're a 20, 30, 40,000 SKU company, you're probably dropping a lot to Google every month because you're running shopping and PLA and all of that. And then inversely, when you're a disruptor with a really great and cool and trendy product, you're probably a little bit more on Meta, right? So people focus on, this individual campaign performance and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, but your aggregate business CAC to LTV ratio is off. So like what you're doing here, a phrase I hear a lot is, you're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic here. This is not effective. So one, look at your aggregate business health and understand how far away you are from where you want it to be. And there's always a drive to make it better. You always want to try to grab a little bit more margin. Sure, you want to improve your customer acquisition costs, obviously, right? And you want to extend your LTV. Everybody wants to do that. These are guaranteed. But if your aggregate business performance is in pretty good shape, then I always encourage brands to take that next step and understand where they see their growth levers. And a lot of the companies I work with, I would say I'm most historically involved with subscription commerce companies. The evolution of subscription commerce is essentially, how do you increase LTV? And increasing LTV is sometimes but not only as easy as increasing your price. You got to find ways to change your offering. You got to find ways to evolve what you're offering, adding more between shipment, upsells, and cross sells, and other capabilities that extend LTV without diminishing or increasing cancellation rates and giving yourself more opportunities to market. So right now, once you sort of have the macro picture squared away, start zooming in on parts of the business that you believe you can extend. And I would say that the number one thing I see that a lot of companies now are realizing, hey, I can get more out of my customer database through CRM, the tactics that they're doing between email, SMS, app, and web push, if they have those capabilities, to increase LTV, to increase that community and find more value out of it. But it's not hard. There's just a lot of things you have to do in order to grow a company that way. And don't get caught up in what you can't track. I see this time and time again, that there's a consistent trend of obsession with what you can't control because you can't track it anymore. Everybody wants it to be 2019 again. It was awesome. Even post Cambridge Analytica, pre iOS 14.5 was great for marketers. But now you have to look at, well, there's this little bit of fog here. Your overall business is performing pretty good, or how could it perform better? And then start making incremental changes to do that.
Mm-hmm. We actually find that hard ourselves at Link My Books as well after 14.5, in terms of, we do Facebook ads, we do Google ads, we do various other things like SEO and stuff like that. And we used to really like, obviously because we are analytical people as well, knowing exactly how much we were making from each of those marketing channels and which was the best and which to pump in more effort to and more money into. And now, as you say, the fog is there. It's really tricky to, even though we do have ways to work around it, like using the specific landing pages for specific channels and stuff like that, it becomes messy and it's really complicated to then unpick. So I can imagine that a lot of businesses out there in the e-commerce space face the same problems.
I was going to say, the last thing I would always check with that, this is an obtuse question I ask a lot when I was working on the agency side and even now, but it's one I find to be the most effective, actually, is when people are trying to understand a difference in customer acquisition costs between this week and last week, this month, last month, this year, last year, whatever they're looking at. Because I've been in so many conversations where it's like, our media is not as effective. Our customer acquisition cost is going up. Why? Well, the first thing I always ask is, well, there are only a handful of metrics that affect your customer acquisition costs. It's your conversion rate, and then it's the elements on your cost of media. That's pretty much it. Like, in the elements of your cost of media, is it your CPMs are going up? Is it your click-through rates going down? or your CPCs, if you're in a CPC world, are changing. And understanding you could draw a direct bridge between my customer acquisition cost from here to here. It has gone up this level because of conversion rate has changed, cost of media has changed, our media performance, click-through rates, etc. have changed, because if your conversion rate's high and the CPMs are the same, then it's your click-through rate, because you're not getting as much, you're still sending it to the same amount of people. You're just not getting as many clicks to your site. And then if your click-through rate's as good and your conversion rate's the same, then it's got to be your CPMs. It's like, so understanding which one of those is actually changing your customer acquisition cost makes a big difference in what your tactics are, because you can't control CPMs that well, but you can control conversion rate, right? You can control click-through rate. You can look at your ad efficacy and what your ad's focusing on and to that audience and start making adjustments. So that is the literal go-to question I always have when I hear somebody say, hey, my CAC has just gotten worse. I'm like, well, what is driving that change? And so frequently that answer is hard to ask, or hard to get answers for, yet the answers are right there. And it's really not, it's not a million things. It's one of four basically things.
Yeah. But I suppose it does boil down to, even though you don't have control over tracking these metrics to the nth degree, it is just thinking about what things you actually can control. And I suppose that's where like better ad copy, rotating ads, and making sure that they are performing the best on the click-through rates and stuff like that. I think that is obviously something we can control. So it's looking at things like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's looking like things like that, and continue to be experimental. There's a need for many to like kind of clutch their pearls when CACs are getting hard. And this is super counterintuitive. And one of those things when you're in a panic state because you're like, oh, my customer acquisition cost has gotten worse over the past 3 months, and there's something wrong here. There's a tendency to be less experimental. And I try to push brands and entrepreneurs and companies to be like, no, you got to be more experimental right now, because the same stuff is obviously not working. And it's kind of a fallacy to think it's going to start working better. Instead, be experimental, try new things, break into a new audience, try that new marketing channel that you haven't yet, because those are more likely to lead at least a different result, or potentially teach you something about your business that you didn't know. Because losing and having media that doesn't perform, or having a downturn in performance, there is way more to learn in that period than there is to learn when you're doing really well. Because when you're doing really well, everybody's answer just like, dial up the media. Let's do this. And like, let's crank up the budgets. This is great. No, very few people reflect on, well, what's working well. There are some, the best entrepreneurs in the world, the best. But like, when things are working well, they're not asking these questions. When things are just like, well, what's going on? Why can't we scale anymore? Turn down budget. But like, understanding and asking yourself along the way on your upswing, to anybody out there, if you're lucky enough to have a really great business that is doing really well, as many, if not more, questions on why things are going well, instead of just being like, crank them budgets up.
So you're a problem solver at heart, and I'd love to hear about your approach when meeting with new clients. What strategies do you utilize in those first few meetings, and what do you need to learn at the very beginning in order to help them?
So that's a great question. For me these days, for the past year and change, I've been jumping into these sort of fractional CMO type roles, which is a trendy thing right now. A lot of people are jumping into the space. And what I'm trying to do is, I say a fractional CMO. I got experience as a CMO, as a COO. I have experience just tenured into this industry. What I like to say is, yeah, I'm a fractional executive that comes in with a really broad mandate, and I look and identify companies. When I'm discussing with a company, or they're reaching out to me, or I'm reaching out to them, I look at just what problems they're trying to solve for right now. And a lot of those problems I've dealt with at various parts of my history in this industry. I think the key for me is understanding not just what their problems are, their flexibility on solving those problems, meaning like how far do they want to go when it comes to their organization, their team, their technologies, their marketing strategy, their unit economics, all of those pieces. And then when I try to work with them, is I try to stay focused on, sort of the biggest problems in the room and attack those head on. And that attacking them head on could range from an underutilization of your CRM capabilities. I've seen many big businesses that, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue per year that have fairly rudimentary CRM tactics of just, we just batch and blast. We send 50 million emails a week and we just don't care. And it's like, okay. And like, it works for them, but it's also just not, they're wasting money. They're bleeding cash on things like their ESPs, their data warehousing, whatever they're doing there. So I try to just like, it sounds simple enough, but my approach is always try to be like, well, I could show immediate value in what you're paying me if we're working together by just me finding these things that you're wasting $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month on or more. And that's a lot of my approach, because businesses, look, and there's nothing wrong with this, right? Businesses, when they're exciting and on their upswing, or even when they're big, the natural tendency is to throw people at problems. So you have usually more people doing things than you need. Then you also just have technology layers. This is like the one that absolutely, these days, especially with AI, the emergence of AI, boy, big companies love their tools and everything they use. There's somebody that uses, we use Notion for this, and these are great. These are all great companies. So like, I love tools, but it's like, I got Notion for this, I got Coda for that. We use Jira over here, and then I got Fireflies for this, and then I got Monday for that, and then it's like, it really becomes a meme of like those jokes where people are listening to marketers talking. It's like, I got to take the bongo, go put it in the jingle, and then I got to take the jingle task and put it in the Jira, and it's like,
who told you about our tech stack? Because you just described it.
Like, I did a little research beforehand, but it's just amazing, because those all lead to these weird archaic things of like, well, I do this and I don't know why. Like, a lot of people, I'm like, well, I go in and I start talking to people. I'm like, well, why do you make this, or why? Who reads this? And like, I just know this has to be done every week on Thursday. So it's amazing how much waste you find that it's just like, why are you? So I try to take that approach and just looking at where you're wasting your time, your money, in your efforts. And then, of course, on the business health, I have to build and understand their modeling, their pro forma, their unit economics, their CAC to LTV ratios, what they're comfortable with, and media payback, all of these like moving parts, because some brands are well capitalized and they're like, 12-month media payback, fine by us. We'll spend $50 million a year and have that as basically working capital, because we're not going to see that money for 12 more months. And then there are some that are like, well, if I'm not profitable in 30 days, then I can never scale this. And it's like, okay, well, let's approach both and see what's going on.
Yeah. So do you ever find that the client thinks the problem is a quick fix, but you believe it's actually a much bigger problem?
Yes, all the time. So it's from my agency time. It's every client, every company. There's a quick fix in everyone thinks that like, oh, I just want to get to this state, which is a quick fix. Sure. But like, the way to get to that state becomes complicated when you're sort of running a business at the same time as trying to get to that fixed state. And I'll give a good example. Is one of my clients I've had, it was doing a ESP migration on the enterprise level, call it a billion email a list type or email sent a year type client, but doing a migration in a very quick period of time. And when you're at the enterprise level, ESPs are largely just messaging tools that work off of a data layer that you feed it. You're not just like using Shopify necessarily and being like, yeah, send to existing customers. It's like, usually there's a layer of sophistication there, but you also have to like keep your normal business going while you're doing ESP migration and translating the lexicon between one ESP to another, which this trigger series over here, they're called X, and this over here, they're called Y, and this is how we do things. There's a real underappreciation for like incremental work to do these big initiatives. And then candidly, the bigger the company, the harder it is to sort of get these in place, because there's just more moving parts, because the average team member, engaged or not in the company, I'm not talking about the quality of the team, but just like the appetite of that team, there's a tendency to just fall back into to what's familiar, because many people on individual contributors in a company, which keep the business running, by the way, are just trained to like, I use this system or I do it this way. And it's easy to forget the sort of splash damage or the radius of a sphere of influence you have when you're trying to change from doing one to another. And there's always just a a rush for entrepreneurs. Every good entrepreneur believes that something can be done quickly, and it could be done. It should have been done yesterday, and they expect it to be done quickly now when you get in. And it's like, I hear you, but like, in order to, without crapping on the business as it is now, we have to really be methodical and create new processes, redefine roles with the human element, because the human element is often disregarded, and then recognize that it's not enough to just say, do it this way, and this is how we do this now. This is the technology we use. This is our means. It's also a reinforcement and showing the results of that, because that will blow up in your face as a company when you say, we want to go from X to Y, and whatever that is, a big change. And even when you get there, you're not reporting on why it's better. It maybe not be better, and not recognizing that early, and then and also not listening to the team and being like, they're like, well, hey, we're doing this stuff now, and then somebody's like over there in the corner has been working 150 hours a week, and they're like, yeah, but my life is miserable now because I used to just do this, now I have to do all of this. Take a step back and just configure everything leading up to that point, because it is not just we do this now. It's considering everything that goes into that. It could change your supply chain, could change your marketing mix, could change your data, your tracking, your attribution. It's about making sure and not being impatient when you get there. But every good entrepreneur, this is a great thing about them, and I'm not this kind of thinker. This is what I've had to learn being on my own for the past year. It's like, oh, this is an easy fix. All we got to do is just do this to that, and it's good now, right? It's like, I have to be like, yeah, but like, we also have to think about this vendor. We have to think about like these people. You have to think about this team and like what they're doing. And also, you don't want us to stop marketing for a week, right? Or 2 weeks or a month. So we have to be doing normal work on top of this. So
yeah. No, well, I think if we think a little bit more about the lifetime value of the client, about the buyers as well, I think you have the time to be able to like rework these marketing initiatives. It's not like quick wins is everything that everyone is looking for. I think everyone wants a quick win, but most of the time the businesses that we work with are at a certain scale where they've picked all the low-hanging fruit, and now they're trying to grow to that next level. So they need to be thinking a bit longer term in order to make changes now, which will affect 3, 6, 9, 12 months in advance. So if we dial it back now a little bit towards the sort of LTV, the lifetime value, and the customer acquisition costs, I've got a few questions around that. So you recently wrote an article for onlinecaso.com talking about the tips and tricks of lifetime value. What strategies do you have for factoring into LTV for business analytics?
So when you say for business analytics, do you mean just like for a way a company is thinking about their LTV, broadly speaking?
Yeah, exactly. So how should they be looking at that? How should they calculate it, first of all, for people out there who aren't maybe sure about exactly how to calculate the lifetime value? And then how should they be thinking about ways to improve that?
Yeah. So the short answer to that is recognize that you rarely, not never, but you rarely find net zero or net improvements to LTV, meaning something that doesn't come at a cost with something else. So it's always running and improving LTV is a lot more like a puzzle game frequently than just adjusting price or adding a new product or creating an additional more expensive offer, because there's usually something's got to give. What I mean by that is, easiest example, but then there's infinite amount from there is, oh, I increased price. Great. Now my margin is going to go up. But yeah, your customer acquisition cost most probably goes up too, because people are used to seeing you for X. Now they see you for Y. And then conversion rate goes down. Now maybe you can add $1, maybe you can add $5 without that conversion rate changing, and your CAC stays the same. But maybe you start making $15, $20, $30 jumps. All of a sudden, your customer acquisition cost looks different. So maybe your TV has gone up, but your CAC has gone up alongside it. But then extrapolate that to anything. You might say, oh, I'm going to pick up a couple points in margin with this new vendor that makes my consumer package good, or this reseller or whatever. Okay, but now maybe your inventory quality has gotten worse. So your LTV will go down while you pick up margin points on cost. So this is all a roundabout way of saying that there's usually trade-offs, and you got to make sure to measure that. Now, you can occasionally find things that just straight up improve LTV. A lot of those are kind of obvious things like, post-conversion upsells that between cycles. If you're, again, I talk a lot from the subscription lens, maybe your quarterly shipment box, but now you have more activity going on between your two shipments. And those could be flash sales, e-commerce events, who knows, right? So when you're looking at LTV, I think it's important to try to have a hypothesis on what moves the business forward and also in turn can move the business back in certain ways, but is a net move forward. You're looking for a lot of, 2 steps forward, 1 step back type moves. You rarely just get 10 steps forward. It just doesn't happen. So when you're looking at that, you're looking at your margin profile. I generally struggle when brands are shipping at a gross profit margin in consumer packaged goods to customers less than 50%. It just look and defined as the cost of goods all the way through fulfillment and shipping to get what you're selling to that customer to their doorstep. If you're doing that at less than 50% gross margin, before marketing and everything else, obviously, then you're leaving yourself not a lot of room for marketing and for team and payroll and everything like that. It's just like the reality of it. Now, if you're well capitalized, you have a long payback period, 30-40% margins can work, but that's a very fragile situation where you may not know you're in trouble till 6-12 months into it. So I look at their margins. That's kind of an obvious one. Look at their channel.
Is that different in the subscription space though? So if it's a direct to consumer product and you're talking about 50% gross margin, what about if it's a recurring subscription though? Would you then consider a slightly lower margin because over the lifetime, you're going to get a lot more value out of that customer? And then how would you go about advising brands of the best way to calculate that in terms of when you sell this product and you sell it once, you'll make this. And then on average, people will use it 9 times and they'll get this much. How does that equation sort of come about?
Yeah, so this is a subscription models. You have some form of, if you're doing the financial planning and analysis with that, you have some sort of waterfall type model that, looks at your cohort and what their contribution is over time. Subscription models certainly allow themselves to have lower margin because you will get more revenue over time. But the trade-off there is still analyzing your media payback period. And your media payback period times your average media spend is essentially working capital in your business that you can't really touch if you want to keep the business going. An example for everybody for that is, say that you have a 6-month media payback because you've done your LTV, you look at the CAC, you've run that model and say, okay, the customers we get in this month, 6 months from now, we're fully profitable after media. Cool, right? Well, if your customer acquisition and you're spending, say, $100,000 a month, that means you have $600,000 in working capital to keep your media flat because you're not getting that back for 6 months. You have 6 months of media, that working capital's there. Well, what can happen, and it could be good and bad, but the bad scenario is, let's dial up budgets a little bit. Let's go to $200,000 a month, 50% increase in budget. Well, now, what if that media payback period goes from 6 months to 8 months? Well, shoot, you went from $600,000 in working capital to $1.6 million in working capital. And that working capital's got to come from somewhere for you to keep that trajectory going. And you may not know the answer to that because the LTV is different. Like you can see the CAC change and everything, but maybe the LTV is worse. Maybe you found your new incremental customers are potentially worth less. So now on a cohort basis, because you're running a different discount, you're just you're running a different channel. Channel-based LTVs are different. Google customers are historically different value than a Facebook customer, than a Tik customer, than CTV. They're in the ballpark, but they're still different. And that's a big mistake people can make because all of a sudden their working capital needs go way up and they can end up in a situation where they have to negatively turn the business back to course correct. So, you have to have this sort of waterfall pro forma model that looks at cohorts, how they're doing, their customer acquisition costs, and start picking points to influence those that make the biggest and most sense for your brand, whatever it may be. And don't lose sight of the fact that what are the upsides, and this is going well. The things where it goes well are usually, as I said, upsells, things that improve that. Things that go bad are customer acquisition costs, margin, potentially things that are variable workforce. So you need to get more customer service agents. Those sneaky costs get up, right? You have to get more people. You have to increase your fulfillment. If you're using a 3PL, you have to increase your contract with your 3PL provider and all that. So those things really can influence, obviously, your business. The basics with all of this, as you sort of get down to wrapping your head around the sort of LTV and how that works with subscription. Yes, subscription, you can have lower margins, but like say you're operating 30%, depending on what percent you're spending on advertising of your revenue, you're still running, even in a longer window, you're just still running a very tight ship, unless your customer acquisition cost or a CAC to LTV ratio is like 6 or 7 to 1, which would be amazing. If you're operating at like a 3 to 1 CAC to LTV ratio and your gross margin's 30%, you're not making money. And like 3 to 1 CAC to LTV ratio is considered a pretty good growth CAC to LTV ratio, but it's not a sustainable CAC to LTV ratio. And that's all relative to margin. So that is like the rub. Like, you want to get out there. If you're the kind of person or kind of company that's got a ton of access to capital, great. Like, get a foothold in the industry. Lower margins chances are, what that means to the consumer is I get a great value as a consumer. But the downside to that is, it's like the earlier days of Amazon. They didn't make money forever selling you all those products, but what they do, they, over a long enough period of time, they finally do. Well, most companies aren't Amazon. Most companies don't have access to billions of dollars in capital. So you got to be really smart about that. And if you can't make a 50% margin profile, adjust accordingly. And that could mean slower growth, responsible growth, especially with capital markets being, who knows what they're going to be. You don't see a whole lot of funding going out there and just people writing $500,000, $1 million, $2 million checks to any company in the space these days. So funding your company from start to finish and having a good, responsible company that's run cleanly is always going to be a company that can attract capital and be a good business.
Yeah, I totally understand. So how can you then take all this data that you've been looking at in terms of analysing your LTV and your CAC and stuff like that, and then implement it into a working growth marketing strategy? What sort of approach would you take there?
It's only as easy as just showing it, and then it happens. I wish. But the reality is I spend a lot of time these days, especially, but I got exposure to this when I was running an agency before. You have to be willing to sort of have, and from my seat, you have to have challenging conversations that show. I try to demystify everything I just said by saying, you are here and you want your business to go here. Okay. Here are some things that I think could be really positive in that. Here are the drawbacks that could come from those things. And depending on the personalities you're working with, there's people that don't like to hear anything negative. So I have to position it as like, here are all these things that are going to increase LTV. But here are some of the challenges we may encounter in doing that. You got to keep the hype up, right? You don't want to be the Debbie Downer coming in, but you don't want to, it's a great way to lose clients. And what I'm doing is, but sometimes, you have to shoot it a little bit more. I always like to bring the full exposure to the picture. I'm not a pessimist. I'm not an optimist. I'm not even necessarily a realist. I just like to tell the story. I use a lot of this to tell the story of the brand. And they ask me these questions. I say, like, here's some ways to think about it. And usually the best part is when you work with teams, you usually can find out in their internal lingo and to their customer, which they are way more intimately familiar than I am, how we cross that bridge in a way that does feel more comfortable. But you got to just be able to show and tell that story and paint that picture of saying, like, these are the strengths, like, call it a classic SWOT analysis. But what I try to expose to that is look at, these are the things that, from my experience, really excite me about your business. And I could be going into, I look at your infrastructure as a team and the scalability of that team, because that is still a cost. The strength of your systems. So your systems being your reporting platform, what you're doing to analyze, retrieve, store, and further retrieve data. The quality of the team in growth positions. So your growth marketing, your CRM, the things that really in consumer packaged goods drive that part of the company forward. I look at the realism of a strategy put together, because one of my classics, say that a lot of people probably also say, is, a model's numbers on an Excel spreadsheet. The reality is, what do you do when media doesn't cooperate like that? Or what, like, you can't control what these publishers, Google, Meta, etc., are going to do with their ad rates. So what happens if you can't get past this spend on Facebook? Like, you have to have a plan. Are you ready to open a new channel? Can you? Are you ready to take the hits that come with opening a new channel? Because it usually doesn't come out going well. And that's not a negative thing. It's just, I don't ever see anyone be like, hey, you just turned on media and, CAC to LTV is probably about 8 to 1 and no big deal. And we're going to turn on CTV and guess what? It's the same. No, that doesn't happen. So you have to be ready to understand the pains with that, because everyone, and this is a great of the best entrepreneurs in the world, is it is a highly optimistic view, and there's nothing wrong with that. But don't let the optimism cloud what can be downside, so then you're not surprised when something doesn't go to plan. So it's getting that buy-in, communicating that, and deciding on tactics that we want to put into place and measure everything along the way. Because I love to say that whenever I suggest something, it's accurate and right, and that's how it's going to be. But there's market hypothesis and there's market realities. And when those market realities hit, then we look at that and say, okay, that wasn't the best idea. Let's try this one. Of course, my job is to try to give you the best ideas I think are going to be the most successful. But that may mean that you have to change up your team, may mean you have to change up your systems. It may mean, take a step back before you take a step forward. And those are the hardest parts to get across. But I'm aligned with business success the most when everyone's flexible.
Yeah. But talking about systems, then that's a nice little segue here. So what sort of technologies are you using the most in your work, and how are they helping?
Maybe it's my old school nature, but what's tried and true for me is, and this is not a shameless plug for PIQED, but I like to kind of bring it back to some of the basics by bringing everything in, looking at all the data available in front of me, bringing a view to it, usually independent of how brands are looking at it. Not independent in the sense of what they're looking at is wrong, but I like to build my own bridge on what I'm seeing and see how there's differences, right? Because the systems that are in place may be overly complicated or not enough for what people need. Like a good example are analytics tools. Say you're a common, like most these days, you're running a Shopify, Klaviyo, some sort of stack like that. You're doing Meta, Google, sort of the cookie cutter playbook for most businesses out there in e-commerce, right? The chances are you've probably bought Triple Whale and you have a Looker Studio set up. Maybe you're big enough to have Tableau and something like that. And nothing wrong with those companies at all. Those are like great plug and play tools, but they usually leave something to be desired, because every company I end up working with and consulting with, I asked one of the first questions I asked, like, well, is there data you don't feel like you have access to? And every single one of them has, unanswered questions. Like, I've been really wanting to see this, but I can't figure out how to do that. I'm like, why can't you do that? Like, the data's out there somewhere, but maybe they're in two far separate systems. Or so it's actually usually a lot around LTV and sort of how that ties into full supply chain. Supply chain, when you're using 3PL, 3PLs are fantastic for, no one wants to operate their own warehouse. So you have to kind of use them unless you're a real big company. But understanding their, per order cost and margins and everything down to the media, there's a lot of ground to cover between those two. And usually there's just gaps in lifetime value measures that are put in as plugs that kind of come in at the end of the month. Like we blend out, like a good example is a lot of companies will blend out their shipping rates or blended shipping. And like on a blended basis, when you're looking at the monthly picture, it's great. It's like, okay, yeah, this is, it costs us $8 to ship per order. Okay, that's right. But like, what's that range? Well, our most expensive orders cost $35 to ship. Even take out Alaska and Hawaii and stuff like that in the U.S. And then our least expensive orders are about $5 to ship. It's like, okay, well, what happens if our tactics focus on, your East Coast company, you ship out of the East Coast, now you got to ship more stuff to LA and San Francisco, and now you're jumping zones. Understanding your tactics between, I want to grow the business in these verticals in these places, and what that does to individual order contribution, because you want to minimize orders that you're underwater on. And a lot of brands don't recognize that, like, oh shoot, there are some orders that we just like, in order to service Alaska, Hawaii, or we're an East Coast company, in order to service certain types of orders in LA, like brands will send, like they have customers that they're perpetually negative on, and they're not addressing that problem. It's a real thing, because shipping rates and these needs, like individual customers that they're upside down on. So a lot of the factors around LTV are nebulous. And then really sophisticated companies, or companies that strive to be sophisticated, struggle with sort of getting the full, sort of full spectrum of systems between finance, HR, sort of workforce management and all of those to a marketing P&L, which is usually focused on just media and marketing expenses, a lot of times there's just a lot of leaps to kind of come from one to the other to a combined P&L. And I always like to try to emphasize a method of every order that you take, find profitability and be able to measure that. And I want to know what I paid for that customer, how much we've made from that customer. I want to know from Daniel how much we spent to acquire Daniel, how much we've spent to keep him engaged, and then how much we've made from him over time. And you will come to find that like there are these little pockets of just like, oh, this customer cancels and reacts every time, and they're taking advantage, or they only buy when there's 50% off promos and we never make money on them. That's a blind spot with data. Another blind spot, I'll give a more practical, that's kind of a deep cut. A high level cut of data that I find that is simply sneaks up on everybody is creative performance and consistency between what creative they're using on platforms and its performance. And a good example is I can't even think of a brand that I've jumped into that had an awesome, just say great naming convention for UTMs or campaigns out the gate. And it sounds super simple. It sounds like building blocks of a company type stuff. But this was me drawing back from my early parts of my career. Is I'm like, well, a campaign name, you name something in Meta or Google or Tick or whatever, should have a couple of important components to it. It should have sort of campaign, meaning like a model. If you're using a model or you're using a specific campaign, give it an identifier. Give it a promo identifier, and do this all in a string, like with underscores and stuff. So then if you're looking at multiple data sets between my TikTok performance and my Meta performance and Google, et cetera, or CTV, well, I want to know how this campaign is doing over multiple channels. That is like painfully difficult for many companies because you have to literally look at like the actual creative, because it was named Daniel underscore 50% off underscore unboxing 01 in Meta, and then Tick, it's named unboxing 50% off. It's like, but I can't marry those two. So like looking at aggregate creative performance, when you're thinking of a long-term story, and this comes from my fashion days when I was working in women's fashion heavily, you start identifying trends with models, creative type campaigns, what creative type campaigns work per channel. You talk to people now, they have a basic understanding of this. They know that, oh yeah, I use a lot of influencers on Meta, and then on TikTok, I absolutely have to use the influencer marketplace there. But then on Google, we don't, obviously, we do display, but our campaign has this promo on it. And so like, you could start looking at your performance by promo type campaign, by creative type, by just like the actual models and what you're doing. Are unboxings better? Are influencer unboxings? Do we want to have a dog in the video? Like all these sorts of things start becoming really important, and actually tying that together. A lot of times I come in and redo UTM taggings and redo campaign naming conventions. And then you start unlocking the power from pulling in multiple data sources from different marketing channels and being able to say, well, this model, you need to hire this person every season for your brand because they crush it on every channel. And now you know that. So the creative performance and campaign performance tying back to multi-marketing channel performance is usually not considered because it takes a special effort to make sure that you're naming everything correctly so you can tie that data together.
Yeah. So do you think that something like the AI evolution is going to make that easier in the future? I mean, maybe it's not ready now, but in 5 years' time.
The AI side of things, that's a whole can of worms. We could talk a whole episode on that. But the short of it is my bullishness on everything around what's going on with AI now and probably where it's going to go. I like to approach AI in the analytics side as we have an infinite appetite for questions to be asked now, and an infinite appetite to quickly analyze huge sets of data. That is what AI is beautiful at. It's way faster at finding things in complicated data sets. It's able to surface that. It's not quite, could be in a decision-making capability when you sort of understand what the things we're looking for are. But I find that it's really impactful on just identifying trends and actually surfacing the deeper layer of questions like what happened this time that threw your company metrics off. And these are the questions you should be asking, but you can find those a little easier. Now, it may not know the answer to that, but I've been playing around with it personally on absorbing in, like, we build out data warehouses, a very simple data warehouse, simple being using Google BigQuery and pulling all this stuff into sort of a decentralized format and tying it together. Like, I've thrown AI at these things a few times and sort of having it sort of pick out interesting trends. And sometimes it's nonsense. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, that's when we ran this promo, or oh yeah, that's when we had site downtime, and it'll find those things. But every so often it surfaces a real interesting thought and leading to a discussion of like, well, what did happen when this happened? Like, was it our email? Was it way more effective then? Or were we running a really interesting campaign? Finding these anomalies and asking questions is just way faster with AI. And I think that's only going to improve. I'm really overall bullish because I feel like we have to be on what's coming up with AI. But I also see its potential in being able to find these nuggets of information way quicker than I can or anyone else can. And then you're able to start making really fun decisions off of that and look at how to change your business.
And I think that bigger companies like the likes of Facebook and TikTok and Amazon have obviously been doing this already for a long, long time, taking in big data sets, analyzing every little detail. Like, for example, you're scrolling Facebook, you stop for a split second on a picture of a fish. Now every picture you're going to see is it's just going to be fish everywhere. Yeah. So I think that they obviously somewhere underneath the hood in the algorithm are saying that if you stop for a split second, if you hold your cursor here, if you do this, if you do that, everything is built into it. And then something is making a decision on that. And obviously for smaller D2C companies, it's not always possible to bring all of that data in and then build all of those algorithms. But maybe, just maybe, AI could be doing that in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, where you hook up some piece of software to your Shopify store and then it can do all that analysis for you. It can be spitting out, these are your campaigns, these are the UTMs that you need to use, this is how we're going to track everything, we're going to have heat maps everywhere and it's going to be all tracked by that, we need to move this around, and it'll run its own tests and it'll test those things and it'll measure the LTV. Like, I look forward to that, genuinely. I think that will be cool.
I totally, I've been talking with, like, when I talk with my family members and stuff, and it's always a side rail. It's, what do you do exactly to like the people, my older relatives and stuff like that, and like, I have to explain. I'm like, yeah, you've been on the internet, you've seen an ad that I've been responsible for. Just put it that way. If you're a woman on the internet, you've definitely seen a Fabletics ad, and I've been responsible for that. There's all these things like that exist out there, but what's fascinating to me is I always like to explain, well, like, the emergence of all the AI tools and all the AI applications kind of going on right now, it's the evolution of what essentially used to just be algorithms. When algorithms were built upon decision engines that you were saying, you stop on a fish picture, now you're going to see nothing but fish, which is super true. There was an algorithm that said, well, okay, Daniel likes fish, let's show him some more fish, done. Now the layers of that can start going more, AI can start becoming a lot more longitudinal, looking at things way easier and quicker, and sort of becoming a free-form algorithm that is not structured and handwritten by a developer, but instead more organic. And I've been wondering in the browser space is listening to this, but like, the thing that I feel like is the next billion-dollar move from an e-commerce perspective is Chrome, or if Microsoft wants to get back into the browser game and become consequential in there again, maybe with these companies powered by AI. Well, incorporating AI into one's browsing gets really interesting, because what if they're able to say, there are companies out there, Nyla, a handful of others, that can make AI generated landing pages. What I mean by that is a little bit more of like, you probably heard the term WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get in the design aspect. I'd change that now to what you say is what you get with AI. So there's a real world now where you can actually say, like, oh, I want to move this down and move this up, and like, pages adjust. Well, what if on a browser level, it knows the placement that Daniel likes and performs with calls to action, and the way that Evan clicks on calls to action. And then what if you go to ebay.com and I go to ebay.com, and right now, like, we could be part of an experiment that looks at two different versions of the homepage, right? Like, oh, I see it like this, you see it like that. Those are controlled experiments. Well, what if on the browser side, there's all of a sudden this intelligence that a browser knows about your entire lifespan of how you browse the internet and your tendencies, and knows that, oh, well, we put a article about fish on the top of the page, Daniel's in. Like, so then all of a sudden, He loves fish buttons. So but thinking about it from the browser level, imagine the possibilities. Now, people are going to be uncomfortable with this because it is highly manipulative. But think of the capabilities for just pretty much having a comfortable to you web browsing experience that the AI knows this is how you ingest content on pages, and this is how this other person ingests content. And on the user side, it renders differently in ways that make both sides perform better. Maybe it's the same content, but it could be totally freeform rearranged. These are the kinds of things that get me really excited, because browsers, imagine the information that Google, anyone on Chrome, imagine the information Google has on you, and then how that could be applied to commerce with AI is mind blowing. And these things have been happening for ads, on just ads for a while. The tendencies to click on fish ads, etc. But now you're talking about radically potentially changing the content and the user experience on a one-to-one basis. I think that could be evolutionary for e-commerce, because it's going to take the CRO funnel optimization game to a whole new level, because you're talking about a potential for one-to-one. And apply that to email. Apply that to just I want to send out an email about fishing, and then every person that gets an email gets in their own individualized email that your ESP knows. You read emails that are like this, Evan wants to see this kind of subheader, that wants to see this kind of subject line, and that's the only way he'll click on that email. It starts to be I lose control as a person, but it's also super interesting. And I think that's where we're going to, I don't know, maybe I'm too sci-fi there, but I think that's where.
Well, that's already, again, coming back to Facebook and things like that. They do that already as well now. They will show me ads that they know that I will click on. And it's not necessarily even just the types of companies. It can be the type of creative. It can be the way that it's laid out. They might know that I never, ever click in and read long term, so they never, ever show me them. They might know that you do, that you click them all and you read them all, so they show you loads of them. So I think that, again, these big tech companies have been doing this for a while through algorithms and through data engines. And I think that AI is now maybe going to bring this to the masses. So yeah, watch this space.
I'm interested to see. I haven't seen, and I'm not saying this doesn't exist, but I'm super interested to see AI start invading the actual ad optimization space. And I don't mean that I know there are companies that do AI optimized buying and stuff like that. That is different. I want to understand, and again, and maybe this is already happening with Google, who's obviously much bigger into the AI side of things than Meta is currently. But what if just the rendering and the presentation of ads, I'm talking about a full different UI when you're browsing Facebook on your phone or on your computer than I have, beyond just the ad optimization, beyond looking at specifically how you interact with the site, what kind of person you are to ingest information and then sprinkle ads in there more intelligently. I think it's just going to reduce the structure of, you're swiping stories, and every third story you get hit with an ad, or maybe you get hit with 2 ads, and you're doing that. Well, with the way the younger generation are interacting with social media and everything now, who's to say that there's not going to be weird ad formats where they want to do stories, but integrate into the stories and do a little window that actually shows you an ad in the story, because they want to have process more information at once, and that's more acceptable to them, and they interact more. It could be revolutionary to how we all essentially interact with the internet. And spoiler alert to everybody out there, the internet is entirely propped up on advertising, so they will figure out how to improve advertising, because that is the backbone of the internet. The internet doesn't exist without advertising. Sorry, I hate to say it, but it's true. So that will get sorted out. And the AI applications for there are going to feel uncomfortable, but I think are going to move the whole industry forward in pretty big ways.
Yeah. Wow. So we covered a lot today. We went in deep on AI as well. That was sort of unplanned. So I've got 2 closing questions for you here, just totally spinning it on its head here. First is, who in the e-commerce, or who in the world of e-commerce would you most like to take to lunch? You can choose 2 people, and you're going to go out to lunch with them, and you're going to just chat e-commerce. Who is it?
Yeah, it's funny. When it comes to, the sort of the thought leaders in the industry, I see a lot of names, tossed around, and a couple of circles I'm in. I haven't had a chance to meet, the Nick Shacklefords of the world, the Jesse Pujis, and stuff like that. I always just love to learn. If I were to take somebody out to lunch, I want to look at somebody that is a driven entrepreneur that is a lot more creative. I'm more analytically minded. If people that are familiar with the entrepreneur operating system, EOS, I'm a classic integrator mindset. I've been trying to unlock more of that creative side. So these people that can see the future in digital marketing and try a lot and talk a lot, and thought leaders are definitely interesting to me. And then, some of these disruptor CEOs like True Classic Tees, the people that work there, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the Manscapes of the world, all these kinds of disruptor type companies, I always just want to, understand how they got bold to run really innovative marketing campaigns that people still talk about today. Even going way back, I did get to meet once the CEO of Dollar Shave Club before they got bought, and next level marketers like that are willing to try running the kinds of campaigns that Dollar Shave Club did back in the day. Like stuff like that is like, how did you get, outside of being the CEO, like how did you get the buy-in for this? And like, was it not the best decision you ever made by launching those types of ads? It's so cool.
Yeah. No, I've seen the True Classic ads and they are really funny. And then there's another one, I can't remember what they're called now, but they sold like sunglasses. And those guys were absolutely hilarious. And I used to like enjoy seeing their ads. I stopped and watched them right to the end, thinking, well, Facebook will serve me more of these now just to watch more. And I think you even looked them up on YouTube because they were just such good ads.
Yeah.
I never bought a pair of the sunglasses though.
Ironically, but it's still, but you're talking about it. And that's all, there's still a K factor to this day.
Yeah, if I'd needed a pair of sunglasses at the time, 100% they would have been top of my list. Yeah, they were really good. Okay, great. And then last question. What one thing can e-commerce professionals do right now to boost their profitability?
I would say most likely than not, the one thing you can do to boost profitability is look into your internal media, CRM, your database that you have, and focus on ways to monetize that better from a lifecycle management point of view. I come to find that email, SMS, definitely SMS, are some of the most cost-effective ways to improve your revenue without detrimenting your brand and increasing churn. So, really take a magnifying glass to your lifecycle management CRM, because if it's just batch and blast and not very sophisticated, not telling customers the right thing that they need to hear to move a step forward, you could probably find solid improvements there that are just going to be net positive without a real drawback. Then I'll say that is one tactical. I'll give a bonus one, which is just simply review your pro forma model and look at one thing that you think is going to be the most impactful idea to improve your LTV and do it fully. And like, don't MVP it. Don't do it part way. Invest into it fully in 2024 to try to get a build on your LTV and measure it. Like, it's a nebulous idea, but you want to throw 10 things at it, do one thing really well, and what you think is the best idea, and I bet you'll end up with a win when you do it right.
Yeah, no, we are definitely people who fall into that trap. We like to test lots of things at the same time, all MVP, and then the ones that look like they're working, then we'll put more effort in. So maybe I'll try that next year as well. So if any of the audience are interested in getting in touch with you, asking more questions, or working with PIQED, how do they do that? What's the best way to contact you, and how do they get more information?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, PIQED.com. PIQED. Yeah, no U in there. It autocorrect screw me over a lot. That's something I got to think about with my company name. You can reach me at evan at PIQED.com. Go to our website. Find me on LinkedIn. Evan Padgett is my profile name there. I love talking about all things in the industry. And, right now I'm focusing on 2 different avenues. I essentially, my 9 to 5 is working as sort of a fractional executive, broad mandate, trying to fix problems. Happy to engage with that. And then also on the data and analytics side, the sort of 5 to 9 work, building out bespoke data warehousing and reporting solutions, namely around marketing and CRM and sort of the top of funnel marketing stack, and building those custom bespoke to brands, sort of bringing the feel of an enterprise data warehouse to smaller companies, sort of in the $1 to $10 million range in revenue, or even higher. It could go higher, but that's a different side of the business as well. So we have a team that can build those out, and we got a really great formula there. So both of those would be valid ways to reach out to me or just to chat. I love talking, as you can tell.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for today, Evan. It was really nice to talk to you. I'm sure there'll be future episodes to come when we get more suggestions from the audience about what we want to talk about. I think AI is probably an episode in itself, as you said. So yeah, thank you very much for today and all your golden nuggets, and I will catch you in the next one.
Thanks, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
The e-commerce profitability show is brought to you by Link My Books. To find out more about Link My Books and how to accurately automate your e-commerce bookkeeping to ensure profitable growth, visit linkmybooks.com and then make sure to search for e-commerce profitability in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Link My Books, thanks for listening.